Hello and welcome. Many thanks to Life Coach University for the opportunity to contribute using my experience and expertise to pay it forward. The theme for this month's series is lifelong learning, where I'll be sharing with you easy concepts to apply to your everyday living. Every one of you has something to offer, so please consider paying it forward and pay it forward your own way. So today's session is about ethics and education. Now, first, some of you might say, why are we talking about these two things together? Well, first off, let me share with you where I'm coming from to give you some context to some of these ideas that I'll be sharing with you. So my name is Joon Kim, and I'm an educational consultant and educator for the last 23 years. My experience ranges from K through 12, as well as higher education, where I mainly work with graduate students. But whether we're talking about elementary students or graduate students, many of the concepts that we will be covering this month will be applicable, like I said, for everyone and for everyday living. So again, going back to today's topic, ethics and education. Well, first off, what is ethics? Ethics is one of those things that people have an idea about what it is and what it isn't. So if we were to ask anyone what is ethics, their instincts is to tell you what is and what isn't ethical rather than actually defining it. So for example, is it ethical, again, in an educational context, is it ethical to borrow someone else's work and submit it as your own? The obvious answer would be no, that is unethical. And of course, the next follow-up question might be, why is it unethical? And a response would be, well, that's against the rule, or it's being dishonest. So one of the things that we need to sort of understand about ethics is it's too easy to just jump right in to decide what is and isn't ethical, but to really establish a paradigm, if you will, of how do you determine what is and isn't ethical. Now, this isn't a specific ethics webinar, but really it is going to bring together and merge ethics with education. Because if you're watching this, you may be an educator or you may be a parent, or you just might be someone who really cares about doing the right thing. And so this pay it forward, for example, helping others, regardless of whether they're going to do something for you or not. It's not a equal exchange or what we would call quid quo pro. You're doing things for others that doesn't necessarily mean you expect something in return. So let's talk about ethics and education. Now, first off, I do want to share with you that my early education was not here in the US. It was actually in Korea. And even though I was very young, I remember that I actually had a class or a subject that had to do with ethics or civics. These are things that you should do just because it's the right thing to do. And that is yet another way we can think about ethics in its most simplest form, doing the right thing. But again, if we think about this a little bit deeper, we will inevitably ask ourselves, well, who decides what is right and wrong? And again, that is such a topic that merits an entire semester. There are courses taught on ethics. In fact, I have taught a course on ethics, so I'm trying to squeeze in just the most pertinent parts as it relates to education, because as I mentioned, if you are in education or you are a parent, you will begin to see the overlap in education with ethics. In fact, I think some of you would agree that ethics should be part of education. So speaking of education, I think this is where we need to ask ourselves, what is education? What is learning? And how are the two related? Are the two synonymous? Are they the same thing? So I send my kids to school to learn. I send my kids to school for an education. So is there a difference between learning and education? Well, I think we would come up with various examples of how the two are related, but they are different. So learning could simply be gaining more information. Oftentimes, that is sort of the more traditional definition for learning, is the acquisition of knowledge. However, that definition has evolved over the years, and it really encompasses so much more than just knowing. For example, all of us with a phone, and most of us have a smartphone. I finally decided to get a smartphone, but anyone with a smartphone has access to endless information. So do we really need to learn if we have access to all this information literally at our fingertips? Well, this is where we would have to really spend some time breaking apart what we mean by learning. Well, is it learning if you gain a new knowledge, but you never use it? Because that's what some of us would say. It's not only the acquisition of information and knowledge, but it's the application, because you have to use it. That's an interesting concept. So if our kids, my wife and I, we have 3 children, a recent high school graduate, a high school sophomore, and a 3rd grader, for those of you with kids as well. Would you consider your child, they have learned something if they never apply it? Now, some of us would say, no, they obviously didn't learn it, because there's no validation or verification that they actually learned it without some type of demonstration. And in fact, that is the whole purpose why schools have exams, quizzes, homework assignments. Various assessment tools are used to try to measure learning. So again, before we go any further into the weeds, I want to bring us back to ethics. So learning plus ethics equals education. I'll say it again. Learning plus ethics equals education. Now, that's not a universal, it's a law that exists in our universe, that is what it is. But it's a way for us to understand how we can look at education, either as a learner ourselves as adults, or for our children's education. When we send them off to school, are we sending them off simply to learn math, reading, and writing? Or are we expecting more from their education? More specifically, do we want them to be a better person? Are we interested in their character? Think about it this way. If you had to choose the result, the outcome of your child after they go to school, would you rather that they be smart and be unethical? Or maybe they're not doing very well and they're struggling academically, but they would be very ethical or have outstanding character. So again, this is where we have to examine when we talk about our education system. And again, I have spent times in elementary school, as well as middle school and high school, and all the way up to currently graduate students. Is the purpose of education simply just to know more things and to apply more things, right? And that's one of those things that I think we would agree that application is important, but it can't be the end all be all. And what I mean by that is this. Do you really want to determine whether you're going to spend your time and energy learning something only because it's useful, what we would call of utility value, that it doesn't lead to some benefit? Because if there isn't, then I don't want to learn it. And this is where I think many of our students today find themselves. This class, I'm never going to use it. Why should I pay attention? This has no impact on my life. So learning has become very much very utilitarian in value. What is it going to do for me? And so thinking about ethics and education, let's talk about how ethics is viewed. In fact, there's direct evidence of why and how ethics is sort of integrated into our very educational system, at least here in America. And that's, again, I would preface by saying that all my professional experience expertise is limited to the American educational system, and more specifically in California. So in terms of our education, there's a lot of content that's directed at especially younger, but not exclusively just the younger students, of doing the right things. For example, social justice. Education isn't simply just to know that there are these disparities and injustices, but really it is your responsibility as an educated individual to contribute to the resolution or at least the improvement of whatever ailments and societal woes that exist. So how do we know that the ethics has been integrated into our very educational system? Well, we could look at the financial aid of higher education. So students in America who are going off to college, many college-bound students do not have the financial resources to just pay cash for their college education. Many, or should I say most, will find some way to finance their college education. And of course, there are many forms and many ways of financing their education, but one of the most popular and very common is through loans and grants. So loans, you have to pay it back. Grants, you don't have to. However, looking at it again through that ethics and educational lens, how do we view education? Well, the government at least thinks it is a social good or a societal good. Or said another way, college educated population is good for everybody. So that is the reason why there is a vested interest and therefore a benefit to everyone when everyone contributes to higher education. So some of you might be thinking to yourselves, well, I don't have kids, but I still pay taxes that goes towards our colleges and universities. And that's because the rationale is that even though you don't have children directly who will benefit and go off to college and get these various grants and subsidized loans, the fact is that when other people's children go to college and get educated, it's going to benefit you. So for example, as we get older, let's face it, we're all getting older, and we will require more medical services, more healthcare services. Well, by having an educated and trained population of healthcare workers, we all benefit. So when I pay into subsidizing a higher education, it really benefits everybody. Now, fun fact is it's different when they look at graduate education. So undergraduate education is viewed very much as a public good. However, graduate education, don't ask me, who decided, but that is the way it is, that graduate education is viewed upon more as a benefit. I mean, it still benefits society, but I guess there's a certain threshold where it benefits the individual more than the society at large. So that's one specific example of where we see that education and ethics overlap, that they are interrelated, that education has certain responsibilities that are attached to it, if you will. I think this quote might be familiar to some of you. With great power comes great responsibilities. I believe that's Uncle Ben from Spider-Man. But another way to think about it is with formal education, there's a responsibility to give back. So ethics and education, why is it important? Well, for one thing, besides just making sure that our young people are making good decisions and doing the right thing, assuming that we all agree that cheating is not ethical, making best decisions to create a more just and a more healthy society where we're treating each other in a very fair, respectable, and loving way. So here are some evidence why ethics is so challenging? Well, first of all, as we began this session, sometimes we will disagree on what is and isn't ethical. But if we take a step back, let's go even further back. Instead of arguing over what is and isn't ethical, can we even ask ourselves, is there such a thing as a good and a bad? Is there such a thing as an ethical or an unethical act? Some of us would say no, there isn't. There's no absolutes. And again, this is not a philosophy seminar, but just from a very practical perspective, understanding there are real challenges and real issues currently regarding ethics in our education. Don't mean to be controversial or to be provocative in these sessions, but I am merely sharing with you what is currently a clear example of ethics and education colliding. Critical race theory is one subject matter that has really led to a lot of parents getting involved in school board meetings, a lot of the conversation dialogues regarding what the parents want and not taught to their children. So ethics and education, again, it just completely overlaps. And we need to recognize that is a inherent overlap that we must embrace and find a way to work with each other. So in terms of what I have observed in terms of the challenges with ethics in education, is primarily in the form of academic integrity or lack thereof. So for example, I think we can all agree we do not want our students in schools to participate in any dishonest conduct, whether it's copying off of other students and peers during exams or submitting work that is not their own, also known as plagiarism. But ethics really is an integral part of education systems. In fact, it is one of such a highly revered and virtue that is built into education that to really emphasize this point, I work with pre-medical students that are looking to continue on into a career as a physician. Did you know that trying to get into med school after an academic dishonesty record is more difficult than getting arrested for substance, for DUIs, for a minor, it was an assault case against a student. I've even had a student who was arrested with too much quantity of an illegal substance. Academic dishonesty was a much difficult hurdle for these students to overcome than any one of those other violations. The academic integrity also is further complex and challenging because how easy it is to partake in such unethical conduct. Students these days, again, have cell phones. You're able to access and you're able to communicate. So there's an incredible temptation, not to mention pressure. There's incredible pressure to achieve in our education. And so students are finding any small bit of ways to try to achieve when they feel that they won't be able to meet those goals. So ask yourselves this: what do you want for your children, if you have children, or for yourself? Do you want to, quote, be more ethical? Do you want to have a reputation of being someone who's more ethical? If someone is educated, and here's a very, very interesting, psychological bias. People who are educated, people who are highly intelligent, seems to enjoy the benefits that they are more ethical than a person who is less educated. Now, some of you right now, your blood pressure is going up, but you're getting emotional. How is that? That is crazy. That makes no sense. But research does show that there seems to be a certain halo effect about individuals who have more knowledge, who is more well educated, that they make more ethical decisions. Now, I'm not a comedian, definitely not a comedian, but this is where I think some of us are easily drawn to examples of individuals who have incredible, impressive academic pedigree, educational background, going to some of the most highest elite prestigious institution of education, yet they exhibit very often an absolute shameful, unethical conduct. So you have in your mind identified counterexamples of what I've just shared with you. But you know, the thing with ethics is very interesting. As I've shared with you, I've taught ethics. Now, the very interesting thing about ethics is this. We can make ethics course a requirement in the curriculum of our educational system, right? This is something that's so important because that's what we do. We build into the curriculum as a society what we deem is so important and necessary. So for example, most cultures, regardless of what continent and country you're in, reading, writing, and mathematics would be absolutely considered essential to early childhood education. Every child needs to learn to do those things. Now, where we start to differ is when we come to subjects like music, the arts, PE, for example. We've seen more and more of these other subjects being omitted and reduced in the curriculum of our educational programs. So thinking about ethics, you could even make it a requirement to get your college degree. And in fact, at a university I have previously taught, it very much was required. Although it wasn't titled ethics course, it was titled a diversity requirement. You could make it mandatory that students complete that requirement by taking a course teaching that subject matter. Does that mean that that student is now more ethical? Because they've taken an ethics course, does that mean they're ethical, or at least more ethical than when they began the class? I think all of us could agree that just because someone has taken an ethics course doesn't necessarily mean that they're ethical. So as we wrap up here, just really use this today's session to really think about how you feel. What are your thoughts? What are your positions on this topic of ethics and education? Do you think the two go hand in hand? Because maybe some of you might have a differing opinion and say, you know, I think that two should be separate. You know, maybe you take a more technical approach to our school system, that the teachers are responsible for teaching all of the technical things, but leave it up to us parents to teach them all the other life sort of skills and things like ethics. That is for the parents to teach, not the classroom teacher. Very, very interesting debate. I'm not going to get to quote the answer. I think it's going to be one that's going to continue to have all of us work together to figure out what is and isn't, or how do we best coexist with so many different ideas and opinions. So the big takeaway for today's session here is ethics, really think of it as not so much what we do, but it's who we are. It's not what we do, but it's who we are. Same thing with education. It is not what we know, but it's who we are. So education, it's something obviously very close to me. I've been in education for decades, love working with students. I hope you'll love learning about all these various concepts I will be sharing with you this month. So thank you for joining me. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.